Today, our third and final candidate is Ann Birberick, Dr. Ann Birberick from the University, from Northern Illinois University. Her title, and I'll let her explain this if she wants, she calls herself the Vice Provost without borders. Okay. And we asked Ann to deliver a presentation this afternoon entitled, "What are the 3 biggest challenges to student academic success that public research universities face? How do you propose to engage academic units and academic support services in efforts to improve graduation rates?" Ann?
Thank you very much, Tom. So let me quickly unpack what I mean when I say that I'm the Vice Provost without borders. So I'm one of 4 vice provosts in the Provost's office at Northern Illinois University, and all my colleagues have subtitles, and I'm the one without the subtitle. So when we go out into the world, they all say, I'm the Vice Provost of Development or Faculty Development or Finance, and then I go out and I say I'm the Vice Provost. And people say, huh? And so I try to unpack that by saying something along the lines, well, if you have Doctors Without Borders, I'm the Vice Provost without borders. I do all things undergraduate and academic, and I work with all the 6 colleges that are undergraduate colleges. And after years of unpacking it that way, the provost said, we need to give you a subtitle. And so I'm now the Vice Provost of Undergraduate Academic Affairs. So that's the history behind that. Thank you so much for coming out on this really sunny afternoon. What I'd like to do with you for a while is share my thoughts on the larger topic that Tom introduced. I'm going to take a 30,000-foot view, and then I'm going to go down, and then I'm going to go down even a little more on that. And along the way, I'm going to talk about what I perceive are some of the challenges that institutions of higher education face, and then I'm going to end by talking about what I think are some of the strategies that can be used to address those challenges. So here we go. So higher education is undergoing one of those cataclysmic moments. It's a paradigm shift time, and a lot of this is coming to us from external pressures, and so I've listed them. There are questions about, has higher education outpriced itself? There are questions and books written on, is there a value to a liberal arts or a liberal education? And I'm using liberal in the terms of the way the American Association of Colleges and Universities does, the LEAP, Liberal Education and America's Promise. Technology, depending on your view, can be seen as a very positive thing or a disruptive. Clearly MOOCs have entered into it, but we have a generation of students who don't know life without Google. And that is something that has to be addressed when we teach. So technology is in here as well. Universities are being asked to be accountable. It's not just about access, it's also about success. KU has clearly recognized the accountability with some of the targets and goals that you have set. State funding, that's becoming increasingly important. It depends on what state you're in. If you think it's bad in Kansas, I invite you to visit Illinois. We are entering month 4, we have no state budget. So it's really been interesting to do budget development at the beginning of a fiscal year when you don't have a state budget, I can assure you, and you have a governor who has publicly said that he would like to cut higher education by 30%. So state appropriations is clearly, and then some states have addressed the issue of performance funding. And then finally, we have a shifting student demographics. Student populations are shifting if you look at it in terms of regions. Some regions are growing, other regions are diminishing. There's student growth in the South. There's student decrease in the Midwest, the region we're in, but we're also shifting in terms of the nature of the students' racial and ethnic identity. So there's a lot going on, and they're all feeding into the fact that we are in the process of a paradigm shift. So we need to stay calm. So 20th century university. That's that last century. That's the university that I went to. That's the kind of education I got. I felt that it was a good education, but these are kinds of the things that defined it. Breadth plus depth, breadth being general education, depth being the coursework and the major. Didn't necessarily see any connection between the two when I was a student, and I think that has maybe continued today. It was a course-centered curriculum. It was all about the courses, and every course seemed to exist as an island. Even within majors, sometimes you'd be hard-pressed to figure out what was the organizational structure of why you took the courses you did, and how they all fed into one another. And additionally, there didn't seem to be a sense, or at least from a student perspective, and a perspective that was communicated by faculty to students, about what the shared expectations were. But now we're in the 21st century, and this is what the 21st century is looking like in terms of how curriculum and the university is structured. This is KU Core. This is what KU is trying to do. They're rethinking educational practices. I've looked at the KU Core. Kudos to you, or I'm in French studies, we would say chapeau bas for that. You've done a great job. It's exciting. I really like the philosophy behind it. It shows some deep thinking and some good reflection. And you're working across goals across the educational experience. You're putting learning at the center of it with student learning outcomes that you want to measure. You're recognizing that capabilities develop over the period of time. Things are integrated from when you begin to when you end. And you're really interested in integrative learning. And here are some of the examples of how learning is integrated. You're using field-based learning with academic learning. You're taking gen ed with the majors, liberal arts with the professional schools, curricular with the co-curricular. I think sometimes we think the only learning that happens is learning that happens in the classroom. But if you add up the time you spend in the classroom and you spend outside the classroom doing your homework, that leaves a lot of time in the day. And there's an enormous amount of learning that goes on outside the classwork. And there's a trend now to capture that learning, and depending on what institution you're at, actually transcript it on the transcript. And then again, this whole notion of a continuum from the freshman to the senior year. So that's really that shift. So if we go back to the 20th century university, you had that sense of swim or sink. You know, you did the best you could. If you washed out, we'll just get another student to fill that slot. Not so much in the 21st century university. There's that sense of institutional responsibility. We're not just about looking at what courses you take, but what learning goes on in the classroom. To this larger 30,000 foot perspective, let's add what employers are saying. So a couple of years back, AAC&U, the American Association of Colleges and Universities, asked the Hart Research Association to do a poll on employers, a survey on employers. And these are the top 5 things that employers came up with in what they're looking for in recent graduates. And what I liked about this is I'm not trying to diminish the importance of a major, but the title of this survey is It Takes More Than a Major. In other words, with the fast-changing, rapid knowledge industry we have, because one of the things universities do is they create knowledge. And that's very much what research and artistry is about, is knowledge creation. And so things are changing. So students can enter and they can get jobs that we can't even imagine nowadays. We don't know what it's going to look like 5 years from now. So in some sense, employers are looking for skill sets, and they want to know that whoever they hire is able to do these things. So that's the employer perspective. So here's the student perspective, our millennial students. Now you're laughing because you see the guy there and he's disengaged. And I say that's your millennial student if you don't do in your classroom and you don't offer what millennial students are looking for. Then you're creating that situation for the disengaged student. So millennial students, they're looking for an active learning environment. They want to be engaged. They want to know that what they're learning in the classroom has relevance for their life now and in the future. Additionally, they want to know, like, why are you asking me to do this? Explain. All right? What's the learning that's coming out of this assignment? Why am I being asked to do this? Again, relevant. They're more interested in a less formal environment. They're not so keen on what you often hear about in large lecture courses. You might have heard the term the sage on the stage, where you have the professor who's up there and the students are all sitting in the back and they're probably on Facebook or on their phones. So they want a less formal learning environment. They want to interact with one another. And they want that personal connection. They want that personal connection with the faculty member as well. So this is kind of the 30,000 foot. So paradigm shift that is being brought about by external factors and the students that we are engaging with today. So let's bring it down from 30,000 feet a little more. And here's the notion, and this speaks to the notion of accountability. It's not simply about access, it's also about success. And I want to talk about 4 different elements of that, and we'll just take each one of those. So the first element I want to talk about is college readiness. And here my thinking has been influenced by David T. Conley, who's done a lot of work on college readiness. And Conley draws a distinction between college eligibility and college readiness. So you're eligible for college if you've graduated from high school, if you have a certain GPA, depending on the coursework that you took in college, you have access to different colleges, you've taken the ACT or the SAT, all of those things make you college eligible. But they don't necessarily indicate that you're ready for college. You can get in because you're eligible, but you might not be ready. What it takes to succeed in high school is very different than what it takes to succeed in college. Different culture, different environment, different assumptions, different expectations. And so the pieces that interest me the most in this concentric circle of facets of college readiness are the academic behaviors and the contextual skills and awareness. And the academic behaviors are a piece about, do you have good study skills? All right, that's a piece of it. Are you able to examine and reflect upon your performance? Like, are you putting in enough time? Do you know how to prioritize? Do you know how to take notes effectively? Can you pick out from a lecture the key points, or from a textbook the key points? In college, you're being asked to be a more active thinker sometimes than you are in high school, not always. And there's an emphasis placed on critical thinking and on analyzing and problem solving. And that can be a little different for making that transition from high school to college. Additionally, you have this notion of contextual skills and awareness. Do you understand what college culture is about? Can you navigate the college system? All right, that means financial aid, that means registering, that means using whatever the student information system is. At NIU, we have a MyNIU, or a PeopleSoft company school, and so it's like, can you access that? Can you advocate for yourself? Do you know how to do those things? Sometimes we equate that students who have high ACTs or high school GPAs aren't going to have any problems. But that's not necessarily true. I can attest to that. One of the units that reports to me at Northern Illinois University is the University Honors Program. And there's many a sad moment where I see honors students who come in with high ACTs, have full 4-year ride fellowships, and they have not survived. They're on, after the first semester, they're on academic probation, and they're gone after the first year. And it's because their life in certain ways has been very programmed, very scripted. They misjudge their abilities. They don't know how to advocate for themselves. Sometimes the level of freedom that they have in the university setting gets the best of them because they don't have their parents following them around. They don't have principals or teachers calling up when they missed class. They think because they were successful in high school that they can wait till the last minute to do an assignment. They don't understand what the assumptions are of a diverse faculty. So we have to be aware of the fact that there are many facets to college readiness for our students, and that is a factor that as we think about how we want them to be successful, we should take into consideration. Experiential learning, or HIPS, really important. I've listed the 10 that George Koo has indicated. These are the most common. You can parse them out in different ways, but this is what gets talked about and recurs a lot. That photo, those are my students. I developed a study abroad program for the honors program for honors students. It's early on in their honors career. This was the first cohort, so we only had 6 in the program, and the program took us to Montreal for a week, where we did multiple things. We looked at business, we looked at the healthcare system, we looked at history, we looked at the entertainment industry. In case you don't know, Canada, Montreal in particular, is number 3 in the world for the production of video games. All right. So, interesting fact. So we did that. You did not have to know French to be able to go on this program. And we partnered with the University of Montreal. So they were located in the French-speaking section of Montreal. But study abroad is one of those high-impact practices. One of the things that we've done at Northern Illinois University is we've tracked how high-impact practices touch on retention and graduation. So we did a study. We used data from our Office of Student Engagement and Experiential Learning, which offers a lot of these practices. We looked at the student data from that, and what we discovered is that the more high-impact practices that students engage in, the greater their chance of persisting from semester 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 increases, and the greater their chance is for graduation in 4 years. And we took this all the way out to students who have had 6 high-impact practices. What we discovered is if you had 1, didn't make much of a difference, but you started seeing a difference when you got to 2, bigger difference at 3, 4, 5, 6. So this goes back. Remember our millennial student who felt disengaged and sleeping in class? All right, this goes back to the students want to have that engagement. They want to know the relevance. They want to have these experiences. And that is an important piece. And not providing them is not assisting the students progress towards graduation. The next thing I want to talk about is something called equity-mindedness. So we were talking about that there's access and there's also success, all right? So we have an imperative, in my view, that we should graduate as many students of different racial and ethnic as we graduate for the majority populations. All right, graduation rate should have equity. We should have students graduate. If we allow them access, then we have to make sure that they graduate. And part of that is changing a mindset that's frequently a deficit mindset, which places the burden for success solely and entirely on the student. Now, I want to make this clear that I'm not saying I'm not in any way saying that students don't have responsibility for their learning. They do. And they and the faculty members are in many respects in equal partnership for that learning that goes on. But embracing a deficit mindset says that it's pretty much all the student's fault. The student's lacking in this, the student should have done this, the student should have done that. And some of the implication is, well, students would be successful if you just gave me better students. And equity-mindedness is saying we have an institutional responsibility. So we need to scaffold and make excellence inclusive. So if our target of excellence is up here, then we need to recognize that students come to us here, 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 wherever. And we need to do what it takes, not lower the standard of excellence, keep that standard where it is, because that's very important, but we need to take the responsibility to help the students achieve that standard. And a couple of things that go along with this, and that what I've just talked about is bullet point number 2, address the reality of the students. We shouldn't be teaching to the ideal student we have in our mind. We should be teaching to the student we have in front of us in the classroom. All right? But another way is bullet point number 3. We want to focus as well on how to improve our policies and practices. So I can give you an example of what we did at NIU. NIU has 26 feeder community colleges. And lots of times students enter from the community college without their associate's degree. And they'll enter NIU and they'll start, but life gets in the way and they're not able to finish. And so they've entered NIU without their associate's degree and they can't finish NIU with a degree because life has gotten in the way through no fault of their own. Life happens. So what we did is we set up a series of memoranda of understanding with the different community colleges to create what's called reverse transfer. So we looked at the students, and we had the student permission to do this. We asked the students if they were interested. And so what happens is if a student leaves a community college without the associate's degree, but isn't too far off in terms of missing credits, we go back and we look at that student's record with his or her permission, and we figure out if there are courses at Northern Illinois University that student can take, and here's the reverse transfer part, and transfer back to the community college, and that the community college will accept in fulfillment of that associate's degree. So that student picks up that associate's degree credential along the way. And so if life happens and that student can't finish at Northern, that student has an associate's degree for that. Does that make sense? Okay? So that's a way of focusing on how to improve policies and practices. We're somewhere around 10 agreements, and a couple of them, when we're done, they're all in different processes of going. And we've had, at this point, maybe around 70 students who have taken advantage of this. And we work on one-on-one with each of the different community colleges because each community college has different business practices. So you have to do that in a different way. And then the last of this piece is how do we define student success? Well, graduation rates is one way to look at it. And I noticed that in the discussion here at KU, in the newspaper, in the discussions I've had all day leading up to this point, you talk about 6-year graduation rate. And I've said to the people I've talked with, when did it happen that 6 years was the norm? I realize that there's iPads out there, and I realize that's the reporting, but when did we start adopting that it's acceptable to graduate in 6 years? when did we stop having the conversation that you graduate in 4? Now, if you start having that conversation, that changes your mindset, that changes what you're doing. Oh, and by the way, it will help your 6-year graduation rate. All right? So, let's start talking about graduating in 4. And along with that, let's start talking about credit completion. So when did it become norm that full-time is 12 hours? I realize that that's what it takes to apply for financial aid and be eligible for financial aid, but that is not going to get you to 4 years, and it might not get you even to 6, depending on some of the programs that you're in. So we should have this conversation about 4-year graduation, not 6, and we should have the conversation that being a full-time student is not 12 hours, but you want to end your first year with 30 hours. And that doesn't have to happen in 2 15-hour blocks. There's summer, there's intersession. I mean, I recognize that, you can't necessarily do it as neatly as you would like. But think about it. Think about it in terms of an entire year, not just 2 semesters. Pell student graduation rates, that is also important. We shouldn't just be talking about graduation rates. We're going back to that slide that said equity-mindedness, all right? Underserved populations, students that are financially challenged. And then you have transfer success, and change it to think about learning, all right? Not about courses, but about learning. Are we successful because we've graduated more students, or are we successful because the students we've graduated have learned, and we can demonstrate that they've learned and made progress? So this is kind of the wrap up. So how do we effectuate change? And here are some suggestions. So first of all, let's think globally. Retention in graduation belongs to everyone. The students we have are our students. They're not just students in a particular major, because if you think about it, they take more courses than the ones they take in their major. All right? They're our students. So let's think globally. One of the things that we did at Northern to help us start to think globally is we held retention summits, and we shared data, and we started having a conversation with academics, with academic affairs, with student affairs, with support groups. They're our students. How do we all work together for this? But as you think globally, let's act locally. By which I mean we need to identify cohorts of students. We need to think about how we can do tailored initiatives that fit specific students. So we've done various things at Northern, and I keep going back to Northern because that's what I'm most familiar with, because I know that culture and I don't know KU culture. But we started identifying students. The one type of student we saw was students who were just about to enter their senior year. They were 15, 20 hours away from graduation, and they disappeared because they had financial issues. So we figured out how to intervene and help them have the money that they needed so that they could finish out and graduate. You need relationships. You need internal relationships. You need to partner amongst yourselves. You need to build relations. But you also need external. You need to talk to community colleges. You need to talk to your alumni. You need to talk to the high schools. You need to go back. Relationships are key. And they're key because we're all in it together. We need to collaborate. And that's tied to that. Evidence-based decision making is really good, but you want to use data carefully and cautiously. Collecting data for the sake of collecting data doesn't get you anywhere. So you should come up with a hypothesis about what it is you're trying to do, and then use data to help you in making those decisions. Data can also, when it's shared appropriately in not just mass files of data that you have to sift through, but when it's shared appropriately, it can demonstrate how successful initiatives are, and that can help build individuals onto that. Lots of times we have lots of tools, but we never use them fully. You know, a tool doesn't do you any good if no one is using it. NIU has a tool called MapWorks, and we can talk about that in the Q&A if you would like. But it was being used insufficiently, and it took us a while. As a result of these Think Globally, we got much more buy-in in MapWorks, and so we moved from a use of the tool at about 60–70% to 90%. Much better for the students, much better for everything. And then finally, adopt an equity mindedness. Take responsibility. The institution has responsibility, and work with all students. So, to conclude, we want our students to succeed. We know we want our students to succeed. That's why you're all sitting in this room, because you care about your students. That's why you created the KU Core. That's why you created your strategic plan, because you're caring. We don't make assumptions about how your students are prepared, and we have to redefine our roles. And then ultimately, we have to collaborate. And if there's one thing that I can't stress enough is that we are all in it together, and that means the students are in it with us. So collaboration is students, faculty, staff, alumni, everyone, parents even. So thank you so much, and I'm hopeful that we'll have, that I've left enough time for questions, and that just as I hope you will have questions for me, I have some questions for you, and that this is going to be a conversation. And just like my class, no one wants to start. It's okay. Though I did see we filled up the front row. Yes?
So you listed high impact practices and George Ku's work, and I'm thinking about that bell curve of students. And we rarely talk about the students in the middle who are expected to do fine and do fine. But we're not really actively engaging them in high impact practices. I'm just wondering about how you map those to different student populations within the context of an institution like KU.
Okay. So the question was high impact practices and how you map those high impact practices. I'm reframing because I was told I needed to reframe. So if I get it wrong, correct me and I'll reframe again. And how you map those high impact practices to what I've heard referred to as the murky middle. Those students in the center. You know, a lot of energy is spent on students who are not doing well, that are at the verge of being academically dismissed. And then you have your students who are uber achievers, and they seem to, you know, fare for whatever you throw at them. They're rolling. And I like that question because the middle is where you can really see movement and make a difference and impact students' lives. So I think part of that is how you frame it. And here's where advising comes in to play. I think advisors can play a very key role in talking to students when they meet with them about how have you thought about doing high impact practices. I think that when you designed your KU core, you put some at the center. Study abroad is a high impact practice. Service learning, they're part of your goals. You wrote them in to your student learning objectives. So students are going to have to participate in that way as well. But I agree with you. Too often we forget those students. And we shouldn't, because, you know, you can really make a difference in their lives. And I've seen that. I've seen students at Northern who say, oh no, that's not for me. I'm not smart enough. Oh well, that's not the best mindset for a student to have. Okay? You know, where do you get that from? You should try that, you should do it. And I've seen students blossom. And KU is building that in with the KU core. So I think you've recognized it here. Did that answer your question? Okay. Did I get it right, the question? Did I frame it right?
You framed it beautifully.
Okay, all right. I don't want to put you on record for something that you didn't intend or say.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes?
Speaking of study abroad, the high impact practice,
Mhm.
and there are other high impact practices such as internships and such. But these are also issues of social justice and students that come in that don't have the means to afford these. What does your role have to do with that, and how might you address that?
So I think that one of the things that a vice provost can do in connection with some of the other units and within the provost's office is show the benefit for students and use that as a way of attracting donors to fund scholarships for international study and study abroad. But it's not just study abroad. You could do study away. And you could go to regions and areas within the United States that would give you a whole different cultural experience as well. So if we don't necessarily frame it as global, abroad, but as away, which might be abroad, but might be nationally at home, then it becomes less prohibitive in terms of cost. One of the reasons that I did the study abroad program, I designed the study abroad program for Montreal, was that it wasn't prohibitive in terms of cost. I mean, it's not an expensive airfare. We partnered with the university there. We got good rates. They stayed at one of the residence halls. The dollar exchange was basically what the dollar exchange is in the United States, give or take a few pennies for that. Did that help in terms of that cost issue, or?
Yeah, it just seems to me that if these are high impact practices that are going to improve retention rates, they're also in tension with the finances that the students have. So how as we as an institution alleviate that tension?
Okay. So the question was, if these are high impact practices, they can also be in tension with the financial situation of the student population. I would say that you don't have to do all of them, and that some are better cost benefits than others. And so as much as we would like all of our students perhaps to do study abroad or study away, maybe that is not financially feasible for them. So there are 9 other high impact practices that have proven to be beneficial. And it doesn't have to be study abroad or study away. So it might be that you do a senior seminar, it might be that you do a service learning project, it could be that you take a freshman seminar, you write a capstone, you have courses that have intensive writing. There's not a cost associated to that, except you're paying tuition dollars or dollars for the credit. So it's included in. Okay? Yes?
Yes. You mentioned that you direct the students in the American Middle towards these high impact factors with the advisor. So that's an advising job, right? So who you think and how will be the ideal way of doing that advising, right? Because we have professional advisors, we have faculty. When will the moment to do it? Clearly it's an extra time added. So if you want to talk about that, how you see the advising and this other addition that what.
Okay. So the question is using advisors to direct them towards to direct students toward high impact practices. But I want to take that a little further because I think where you're going is it only the role of advisors to do that?
Well, I just wanted you to talk a little bit about advising and
Okay.
the ratio of students per advisors and how you collaborate with faculty, and this is somehow it's another cost of this activity that we are talking to about who does it and how we collaborate across campus to do it.
So let's talk about advising and collaboration across campus, and I can do. And would it be okay if I do it in the context of
Yes, that's
high impact
that's
practices?
why I picked that
Okay.
as a way of asking a question about.
So let's talk about high impact practices first. All right, and go back to the fact that we know that they're effective. And it's not just NIU data, but it's data nationwide, that if students engage in these practices at any point in their career, that they improve their chances of moving through the program, because they become more engaged and they become more connected and they build these relationships. And this has to be, and I've just referenced advising as one of the ways of getting it, but it has to be done all along the way. It has to be done with faculty. It has to be done at orientation. It has to be done in first-year seminars. It has to be done in advising. And it has to be, again, high-impact practices are built in. They're built into capstone experiences. They're built into senior seminars. They're built into courses that have a strong writing component. Sometimes students don't even know they're getting one. If you're teaching a course and you're placing an emphasis on writing, you're engaged in a high-impact practice. And the students in your class are engaged in that with you. But they don't even know that that's what they're getting. So some of the things like undergraduate research and artistry, you need to promote, you need to advertise, you need to advocate for. But some of the other things end up being just built in. And that's what the KU Core has done. I mean, you've built in some of those as graduation requirements even for the students. Advising is key, and advising takes place in many different areas, and you have to think about advising in two ways. So let's think about it from the perspective of the student. As far as the student is concerned, the student has no idea what your institutional organization chart looks like. So if the student asks a question, the student is seeking advice, the student is seeking help. As far as the student is concerned, then that person has given that advice and help and may or may not be an advisor, as we think about it from an institutional organizational chart. But the student is asking for help, it's counseling, and lots of times students ask students for advice. So I noticed when I was looking at your website for the Advising Center that you have peer student advisors that kind of help set things up and prepare students for their advising appointments. But so then there's the faculty and staff perspective, which is different about how advising functions. And there we're looking more at organizational charts, and we're looking more at different roles that professional advisors do versus a faculty advisor and where their focus is. And they all have to come together and they have to coordinate, and they should be talking to one another. And we're back to collaborating. And be mindful that if you're lane changing and you're kind of helping out with this, that you're signaling to other folks that you've changed lanes and that you're working on this and referrals.
But I was thinking just when I hear talking to you, for example, we decide that we want all the students to have a high impact experience the first or the second year, right? So an advisor, a faculty, or someone has to talk to a student and help them directly to do that, if that's the premise. So that will be maybe 10, 15 more minutes in the advising appointment per student, so that you can see what the interest and how you get the students to do that. So who's going to do that, and how we're going to see that happens if we see that gets done all across? So what could be a way, right? Because clearly the advisors have a ratio of students, of these numbers of students. So if you add to their appointment with all the other things that we're having them do, look after one of this. So how we can get that happen? Because that clearly, is great, that's what we want, but how we can translate that operationally with so many students and so many people involved.
So the question is, you have few advisors, they have heavy caseloads, they're being called upon to do many different things. If you add to that piece getting the students into high impact practices and adding that piece to the conversation, that might add 10 or 15 extra minutes onto the appointment. I don't know how advising works in detail here at KU and how the appointments are structured and what goes on in the appointments, But again, if an advisor is helping that student plan out the schedule and talking about things, the advisor doesn't have to say, oh, take UNIV 101 or take a freshman class because it's a high impact practice. The advisor can say, this is beneficial for you, and it can be within the flow of a conversation. It doesn't have to be an add-on, it can be a flow. You can create your own programs in your departments where a requirement is the student has to take a capstone in order to graduate with major X. Well, there's a requirement, it's built in. It doesn't require an extra 10 or 15 minutes, it's just a requirement. And by the way, that capstone also constitutes a high impact practice. Does that help?
No, it is how
Okay.
I'm saying.
We're getting up against it. Did you have a question or two you wanted to ask?
Yeah,
some of our
I
illustrious
do,
guests?
I do. So I want to hear from you because as I said earlier, it's about collaboration and it's a conversation, and I've shared my thoughts with you. So I would like to hear what you have to say. What do you see as what's working at KU and what you'd like to see more of? And then where do you see the challenges? Because sometimes we don't talk enough about what's working.
Chris, you want to tell us, you want to answer that? I'll help her out. If you don't want to.
God, I'm really starting to worry that nothing's working, and I don't think that that's the case.
One of the things I heard you say that I thought was interesting was the enhancement of the MathWorks.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something, we have a similar starfish,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not being exploited nearly as well as it should. So I think that's something where having the perspective, bringing in that perspective would be really valuable.
Okay. Now you have to use the tools you have. I mean, buying the tool doesn't get you anything if it's not used. So that's where people become really important because that's what does it. It's the people. It's not the software program you buy. It's the people, and it's the connections for the students. And then anything in closing that you want to share with me?
Howard?
Me?
Yeah. Howard's deeply involved in first year experience.
Well, I
Okay.
think that first year seminars are working. We are in DIA, we've been heavily involved in that. The creation of that, I think we had 11 in our first year. In our fourth year, we're up to 28. Most of the faculty that have been involved in that program have re-upped for at least the second year, if not more.
That's great.
To indicate, and some of those that have stepped away have assumed different administrative responsibilities on campus, and it's not been possible for them to continue teaching. And I think that there are some good to strong retention numbers associated with students that are in those first year seminars. I'm sitting next to a first year seminar instructor here. And so you asked what
You're on
was
the spot
working.
for a testimonial.
No, I didn't mean to do that to Jim. But I think you asked what was working, and Tom put me on the spot, so I would highlight that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, these are areas that she's addressed. And the last person I would ask and put on the spot, study abroad. Alexis, what's going on that's good and what might be an area of challenge?
I think one of the things that we are doing is working with academic units across campus to identify specific programs and courses that fit within the curriculum so that a student knows coming in as a freshman, if I'm a psychology major, I know that I can go to these institutions, take these courses, stay on track for graduation. And the important part about that is that we've got faculty that are endorsing that, because that's one of the things that students are looking for, is not that this is an add-on experience, but this is something that my professors are saying is important and something I should be a part of. So we are just in our second year of that process, and we've got some in the room here, but I think it's going well so far with those individuals that we're working with.
That's great, because one of the things that I've heard, before I went to the provost's office, I was chair of the Department of Foreign Languages and Literatures, so clearly I saw a lot of students who wanted to do study abroad, and talking to them about study abroad experiences is always a very interesting conversation. And sometimes what attracts them to a study abroad program is not necessarily what I ever would have thought. But one of the things that they always have concerns about, and more importantly, parents have concerns about, and that is, you know, if I lay out the additional expense, what will that do to my progress towards graduation in the program? And so being able to say that you can continue to stay on path because you've either done a semester or a year, or you've done a summer, or actually you can move yourself forward and graduate early, and know that before you've gone over, that the credits you take will transfer back. That is a great relief to everybody concerned.
Okay, we're gonna call it there. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.